Hello and welcome to our video. The video is based on the report, Why is Productivity Slowing Down? The report discusses the phenomenon of slowdown in productivity growth in developed countries. We will examine the reasons as to why this has occurred and the main contributing factors we will use. We will use economic models and theories to understand the slowdown in TFP.
Productivity slowdown was seen during the 1970s, where output per hour experienced a great decline compared to previous decades. From the equation above, we can see growth rate of output per hour is composed of three factors. So which of these factors contributed to this slowdown in productivity? It was in fact a 1.6% decline in TFP growth between these two periods that was almost wholly to blame for the slowdown experienced. This establishes how significant TFP is for productivity of countries. TFP refers to the efficiency in which inputs are transformed into outputs. Chapter 5 of the report discusses the impact of labor markets on TFP and how this causes countries to have differing TFP levels. We will look at the impact of labor institutions on labor productivity. These institutions are features of an economy shaping the allocation of resources, including rules and regulations governing individual behavior, according to Jones 2021. They affect labor productivity beyond their direct impact on labor composition and therefore can also affect TFP levels. From the four channels in regard to these institutions that the report focuses on, we will focus on barriers to worker mobility and discriminations contribute to TFP growth slowdown.
Barriers to work mobility may be behind the declining productivity levels. Countries with high regulation may see low reallocation for workers, which can then lead to lower output levels. Examples of this regulation include non-compete and no poaching agreements. As a result of these agreements, levels of innovation by firms and thus the output they produce is lowered, as they are prevented from hiring the most skilled workers in the sector. Not only this, but the employees may be less productive if they feel restricted by their firms. Therefore, to ensure TFP remains high in a country, institutions should be put in place to foster human capital growth and allow mobility of talented workers. Discrimination is a form of resource misallocation and also causes TFP slowdown. Discrimination has meant even if individuals are equally or more productive as others, it is harder for them to enter the same profession. Thus, with equal opportunity being prevented, potential productivity is not being attained. Discrimination is seen in education. To overcome this and allow for TFP growth, governments can invest in human capital. This can be in state schools to ensure schools in disadvantaged regions are effective in teaching students the skills they need. Education is extremely important for labor productivity as they allow for attainment of higher wages and greater skill matches, which encourage productive workers. Healthcare also sees discrimination, and so investing in it would be essential for TFP growth. We can conclude that effective institutions must be created to ensure labor inputs are allocated to their best use, which will eventually allow for a greater efficiency in output production.
Drawing from the works of Solow in Chapter 2, he recognizes the smooth and stable relationship between inputs and outputs, in particular noting that the height of US growth after 1945 was due to improved efficiency of inputs rather than increased quantity of inputs. The source iterates the concept of growth accounting, the idea that growth can be decomposed into individual parts. For example, capital or labor will improve marginal product, or the Solow residual, also known as TFP, which determines the productive effectiveness of the inputs when making outputs. A chain of events occurs in which output growth ultimately leads to further output growth, yet this relies on the quantity and impact of factor productions. Capital accumulation, as shown in the equation above, demonstrates the effectiveness of investment and depreciation on the long-term growth. The writer implies that falling capital accumulation has enabled a slowdown in economic growth. The Solow model graph illustrates the long-term situation in regards to economic growth, which we refer to as the steady state. In the steady state, the rate of depreciation of capital is equal to the level of investment as per the main source. Economies converging to or at the steady state will see no long-term progression. It is specifically the depreciation of capital that causes the slowdown in production. The source provides a measure to evade the steady state, the process of capital deepening and improvements in human capital. Capital deepening involves increasing the quantity of capital per worker in an economy. Economies with high capital intensity are more prosperous in growth than economies with a weak synergy between inputs. Industries that fail to integrate capital with the labor force include health services and entertainment. This contrasts to the manufacturing sector, which is susceptible to automation. Evidence shows that in the current slowdown is a result of ICT revolution. It is in the best interest of capital deepening. It is in the best interest of growth that capital deepening is adopted by economies. However, there is a trade-off in many other areas, such as external costs of prioritizing capital over labor.
The Roma model goes one step further than the Solo model in identifying what TFP actually is. That is, Roma clarifies that TFP is innovation in the economy, seen within the idea of production function as parameter A. Ultimately, the growth rate of innovation will affect the growth rate of output. Overall, the output production function in the Roma model informs us that there must be constant economic growth within an economy because of the combined effects of, firstly, labor and capital having constant returns to scale, and secondly, an existing stock of ideas being non-rivalrous. Of particular importance is the endogenous variable A and its exponent beta. When beta is equal to 1 within the output production function, growth effects will occur when there is an increase in endogenous variables. For example, if the number of researchers were to increase. However, if the exponent of parameter A were to be less than 1, a leveling effect would happen. By this, I mean any momentary increase in the stock of ideas will only have a short-term increase in the rate of economic growth, but in the long run, return to the initial rate of economic output, thus a leveling effect. The article provides for us four reasons as to why there has been an innovation slowdown. When looking at the second reason, the fishing out hypothesis argues that there are a limited number of ideas, and so new impactful innovations can only be made once. This implies that the exponent on parameter A is less than 1, and that ideas have decreasing returns. Hence, new ideas will have a level effect on output and not a growth effect. The article posits that the most significant and evidenced reason contributing to innovation slowdown is the lags in diffusion of new innovation. Although we can empirically see that innovative digital technologies may provide efficiency, the use of outdated technologies by wider society means that these new technologies are not capitalized upon, hence the slowdown in innovation.
In conclusion, there has been a general slowdown in productivity because of an increase in allocative inefficiency. Some of the reasons discussed were barriers to worker mobility and discrimination, which can be overcome by making more flexible moderations to the agreements discussed and increasing funding into education and healthcare. However, the main driver of TFP slowdown has been decreasing levels of capital deepening. The cause of this goes back to the shock to aggregate demand and government investment after the financial crash in 2008. But there are other structural factors, including increases in investment into intangible capital. This creates a barrier to entry and decreases competitiveness and incentives to invest. The use of outdated tech and lack of adoption of new ones bear some responsibility to slow down in investment also. The paper encourages us to bear in mind that innovative ideas are finite. Thus, it is difficult to accumulate brand new effective tech. So it is worth noting that new technologies are simply less productivity enhancing than past ones. Thank you very much. Goodbye.